Good afternoon. Hi. I'm Andrea Hunter, and I'm Associate Chair of the Faculty Senate and the General Faculty, also known as Past Immediate Chair. And I want to welcome to you, which is the last leg, hear what I said, last leg, of the relay race to revise our general education curriculum. As you know, this has been a multi-year effort that began with the General Education Self-Study by the General Education Council, and that led to the task force that brought us multiple models and led us in a campus-wide discussion of those models, and then brought forward a proposal to the Faculty Senate, who spent grueling weeks in discussion and review, and agreed on a resolution that affirmed some of the core poles and foundations of that proposal, and also pointed to areas for further review and development. So, and one of those was to move with the charge of our Girder 2 task force to take up that review and further development, and that was convened in partnership with the Provost's office. And what we're going to be discussing today has to do with their hard work and the proposals they're bringing forward in response to the Senate resolution. And not to go further than this, I just want to introduce the co-conveners of that task force, Amy Harris-Hook and Jody Petazzoni, who's going to lead us in this open forum. And I just want to say, as the past immediate chair of the Faculty Senate, I'm delighted that this moment has arrived. Thank you.
All right, so yes, I'm Amy. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just kind of the basics, the background, how we got here, all those sorts of things before we get into the actual plan. As Andrea said, this is the end of a very long road. This started back in 2017 with the self-study task force, followed by the first general education revision task force, and then the endorsement of parts of the plan in the spring of 2019. And we, the task force, this version of the task force has been extremely busy this summer putting together the plan that we will be discussing today. Want to make sure that these people get the recognition that they deserve because they have worked incredibly hard. And I think that you'll be able to see, I think it's fairly obvious that everybody on this page has worked extremely hard and have come up with something that I think we're all very proud of. But before we get started, I do want to say that, again, as Andrea mentioned, this is hopefully, well, this is the last leg of a race, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the efforts of all the people who have done everything leading up to this point. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the Faculty Senate, the Senate leadership, especially Andrea and Anthony, for all their hard work and support of this. The initial self-study task force that was led by Chuck Bolton, the last version of the revision task force, who was a great group of people led by Chuck and Alice Hattie, also to the General Education Council and the Academic Policies and Regulations Committee, who helped us through the process last spring, and of course all of you who are in this room today and everyone who has provided feedback and who have engaged with the process that have gotten us up to this point. So thank you. Please give yourselves a round of applause. So thank you. We really appreciate all of your work throughout this process. So I want to talk to you just briefly because, you know, this is not new, right? This is a process that's been going on for quite a while. So back in the spring, Faculty Senate looked at a plan and they chose to endorse parts of that plan. And that was really the jumping off point for the task force over the summer to say, you know, we'll take the information that we've gotten from Faculty Senate and use that to finalize, or hopefully to create a new plan to share with you all. So the things that were endorsed by Faculty Senate was the competency-based framework. So that was just sort of the overall framework of the proposal that was submitted back in the spring. They did have some questions about issues within that framework, but they liked the framework of the competency. They also endorsed 5 of the competencies that were part of the previous plan: written, oral, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and information literacy. And they endorsed the areas of knowledge, which are humanities, social and behavioral sciences, and natural sciences. The things that they recommended for further study was some more details and information about the competency-based framework, especially looking at implementation, other possible approaches to a competency framework. They wanted some more information about the thematic seminar, which was part of the original proposal. They had questions about how to implement a seminar for all new students, how it would work with existing courses, how transfer students would be impacted by a course or a requirement like this. They had questions about health and wellness. What is health and wellness? What are some courses that currently exist that would fall under the health and wellness umbrella? We also had some questions about competencies 6 and 7, which were the global and the equity and diversity competencies. And I keep promising in rooms that I'm not going to say this anymore, but then I keep saying it. They were known affectionately, I guess, as the dangling competencies because they weren't attached to a course. And so there were questions about how that would work for students and how we would track that and things like that. So then the last question or area of further study they had was implementation, policies and procedures, things like 300 level classes, how transfer students fall into this, and questions like that. So the task force really took these recommendations and area for future study as our jumping off point and spent the vast majority of our work this summer on these potential issues. So we're going to talk through that now, but first Jody is going to talk a little bit about the framework. And also please note, we will have opportunities for questions and conversation, but if you want to submit questions, we have a go link up there at the top, go.uncg.edu/genedforum. If you would like to submit questions, we can try to get to those throughout the presentation.
Thank you, Amy. When the Faculty Senate looked at the proposal, one of the very first area of recommendation that they asked for clarification and consideration of was the competency-based framework. We had in the spring proposal integrated competencies and areas of knowledge in what was seen as potentially a confusing arrangement of information. So the first thing that we wanted to do was to address a simpler structure. And the simplified structure literally gives students, faculty, advisors a list of what we have termed competencies. And what we mean by competencies, I want to be clear, are the things that students should know or be able to do when they leave the institution. So our structure proposes 11 specific competencies that are taken as individual courses to complete the 33 to 34 credit hours that were approved by the Faculty Senate. And this is a really important point. In the spring, the Faculty Senate put a cap of 34 credit hours on this program. So everything that our committee did to investigate what should be included in a student's foundational knowledge as general education at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro was driven by the fact that it had to fit within 34 credit hours. And for those of you who were part of the conversation, you may remember that the discussion was initially 33 credit hours, but it became 34 credit hours because our students often take a 4-credit science lab. So we were accounting for that one additional credit. And that's why it's not divisible by 3. It's not an even number of 3 credit hour courses. So that 34 credit hours that a student might complete relates to the additional natural science with lab. that students typically take. This list of competencies was a fluid structure over the course of the summer because, as Amy indicated, and those of you who were involved may remember, we had to ask questions about whether certain components that were proposed in the spring would become part of the report in the fall for our final version. And those courses, just to remind you, or those competencies to remind you, were the thematic seminar, health and wellness, and then the global and the diversity and equity courses. So as the group that was looking at the structure worked over the summer, we had to respond to where the other committees that were doing the work were telling us we needed to land. And where we ended up landing was with this list of 11 competencies. The thematic seminar, which Amy is going to talk about in a minute, has been renamed Spartan's Foundations, if not tentatively, much more close to permanently, and she will talk about the details of that particular course. Written communication, oral communication, and quantitative reasoning were 3 of the competencies that were endorsed by Faculty Senate. Those made it onto the list of courses, and they have been identified as separate courses to be included in the program. So those are 3 credit hour courses right there. We also had to account for critical thinking. Critical thinking was another competency that was endorsed by the Faculty Senate. We all agree that this is an important skill for our students to develop. And the way that we went about integrating critical thinking into this program was to pair it up with the areas of knowledge that had been set forth. To remind you, the areas of knowledge are humanities, social and behavioral, and natural sciences. Those also happen to align with general education requirements that our accrediting agency tell us have to be included. So part of the reason that these are titled the way that they are, humanities and fine arts, social and behavioral sciences, and natural sciences, is to very clearly respond to that need for the accreditation, but also to respond to the fact that these were important areas that our students should at least be introduced to in the general education program. So we married student learning outcomes and critical thinking with an area of knowledge where a student learning outcome will be associated specifically with inquiry into a humanities subject or fine arts, social and behavioral, and natural science. So that's where we're finding our critical thinking competency. Also, as mentioned, the global learning and the diversity and equity learning were also areas that we had to investigate. And when those groups came back to us and said, not only do we believe that these need to be in the program, but they need to be separate courses, separate 3-hour courses within the program, we also looked to the opportunity to integrate those competencies into these areas of knowledge so that students are getting global in a context. So global learning will be integrated into the context of either humanities and fine arts or a social and behavioral. And what that means is that anyone on campus who wants to be part of general education and teaches a humanities or fine arts or a social and behavioral science course can embed competencies related to global learning, and we've developed a definition and student learning outcome for those, into that course and become part of the program. And it is the same thing for diversity. Diversity has a definition that's been defined and a set of student learning outcomes that have been defined, and those will be delivered in the context of a course related to humanities, fine arts, or social and behavioral sciences. So that accounts for 7 of the courses that are included in the program. The ninth one is critical thinking and inquiry in the natural sciences. Again, embedding critical thinking throughout the program was very important to us. And in this instance, we know that our students need to take natural sciences. That area of knowledge has been endorsed by the Faculty Senate. So we provided, again, critical thinking in the context of natural sciences. but also acknowledging the fact that our students need to just basically inquire and understand about natural sciences. That also has a presence here in the program. The 10th course is also a natural science course. This is where we thought that the lab might present itself. And we also took the opportunity to embed another area of learning that we know has been identified as important to our students, and that is data analysis and interpretation. We, in looking at our current general education process, conduct assessment, and as part of that assessment process, we had faculty from the natural sciences get together to discuss the outcomes. And the opportunity for our students to better understand data analysis and interpretation was very clearly presented in those discussions. And therefore, we took the opportunity to add data analysis and interpretation to a natural science course in our revised general education program. And then finally, the 11th course was another item that was identified for further investigation by the Faculty Senate, and that is health and wellness. And again, as it developed, as we looked at the research, as we looked at the arguments for including health and wellness in this program, it became important that we include it. And therefore, it is the 11th course that we have on this list of requirements for our competency-based framework. In developing our competencies, again, what we looked at were making sure that we included the 5 competencies that were endorsed by the general education or by the Faculty Senate. And then over the summer, we tasked faculty who had specific disciplinary knowledge within these competencies to help us further define them. When the Faculty Senate considered the competencies, they said, we like the idea of this. We think generally this is what is appropriate for our students, but in order to understand what we mean by written communication and quantitative reasoning in each of these, we really need to put more meat on those bones. We need to see definitions, we need to see student learning outcomes, and we really want to have a rationale for why these competencies should be in our general education program. So the task force sought help from faculty with specific expertise in these areas. We reached out to English faculty, communication studies faculty, faculty in quantitative reasoning, math department, and we said to them, can you please help us? Can we put together the information that will allow faculty to dig into and really understand what we're talking about in terms of learning in this general education program? So we tasked them with doing these 4 things. Could they please help us define the competency clearly? Would they draft student learning outcomes so that all of the faculty could see what exactly we're talking about in terms of learning? Provide a rationale for including these particular courses in the general education, and then help us identify existing courses so that the faculty could take a look at and evaluate if this was the type of course and the appropriate kind of course for faculty, for students to take in their general education program. And we asked them to do this by August 1st, and sure enough, by August 1st, every one of our teams turned in their information, did a fantastic job of helping us to really dig deep into the definitions, provide explanations for what made sense, what we were really meaning here. And we additionally asked them, along with student learning outcomes, to help develop a rubric so that there is even more definition of what the learning would look like, and they delivered that. So we were really happy with the products, and you can see those products online. I think Amy pointed out that on the Provost website for the general education revision, every one of these documents is there. I'm assuming you're here because you got that communication. You know how to get to those documents if you haven't looked at them already. But what you see there for all of these competencies is a product of your colleagues who have expertise in this area providing to us those explanations. So let's go ahead and drill down a little bit more deeply into these. I'm going to turn over the podium to David Carlone, who is going to talk to you about our oral communication competency.
All right, thank you, Jody. And I think the plan is for us to walk through each of the 11 competencies and then take questions about the whole plan after that has been done. So we'll just kind of be brief with each of these. This component of the plan was developed over the summer by Kim Cuny, Jessica McCall, Jenny Southard, and me. We think this is both meaningful and achievable for faculty and students, and there are 4 things we'd like to highlight around that. So first, in terms of its scope, we define oral communication as including both presentational and interactional components. And we believe that students at UNC Greensboro have to have both of those if they want to be successful in pursuing their goals, whether they be civic, educational, professional. So that's the scope. In terms of instruction, we have in mind that whatever courses are approved could do a variety of kinds of activities and assignments, including things like informational speaking, debates, relational dynamics, group decision-making and discussions. Whatever the faculty choices might be for that particular course, we would expect that students would always receive interactional and presentational competency development. Third, in terms of definition, the outcomes, which you see here, do a couple of things. First, the outcomes include both study of the communication process as well as demonstration of competent behaviors. They also include the word ethical. We define ethical here as responsible, respectful, and responsive. And we think that definition works well for our students. It's important for our university community as well as the world around us. We also, with analysis of messages in the second student learning outcome, we think that fits quite nicely with competencies in areas like information literacy, perhaps critical thinking. You'll be hearing about those. They are all distinct, but there might be some nice complements among these areas for faculty and students. Again, we think this is both meaningful and achievable, and that's another piece of this for us. Finally, in terms of enrollment capacity, we expect that existing GRD courses, reasoning and discourse courses, as well as speaking intensive courses, could be revised with faculty development assistance to achieve these outcomes. And that faculty development assistance could also be used for the development of new courses. So we anticipate that enrollment capacity could be managed pretty readily through this. So in terms of scope, definition, and so on, we believe this is, again, both meaningful and achievable for students and faculty at UNC Greensboro.
You get me for written communication and quantitative reasoning. I'm certainly not going to represent them as well as David did oral communication, but we will go ahead. With written communication, the primary thing to understand is that we're talking about here foundational learning in writing. So the 3 student learning outcomes that were identified, you can see right here. The definition that we have is to make sure that students have foundational learning. The students will evaluate the suitability of written text in relation to particular audiences, purposes, and contexts. We want to make sure that students are able to write to the appropriate audiences and convey the right material for that audience. We're shaping written text toward particular audiences, purposes, and contexts, and demonstrating metacognitive awareness of writing as complex and situational. And here is the response to or the need to incorporate the rewriting process to make sure that students are reflecting on the writing that they're doing in their courses. For quantitative reasoning, a competent student will be able to interrelate real-world information with mathematical forms. So very specifically here, we are talking about students not only understanding math, but performing math, using functions, equations, graphs, diagrams, etc., and demonstrating their proficiency in those particular areas. Students will justify conclusions based on quantitative arguments. That is, they'll be able to understand and explain how they got where they got to with mathematics. And then really important here, not only being able to do math, but be able to communicate the quantitative evidence of the argument to explain how they got where they needed to get to. Turn it over to Amy for Spartan Foundations.
So as Jody mentioned earlier, the thematic seminar was renamed by the task force over the summer as Spartan Foundations, thanks to Frances Bottenberg, who came out with that name, and it was wonderful. I wanted to give Frances a shout out because I love it. One reason that we changed the name of the course was actually in response to the questions from Faculty Senate about implementability. We hope that this course would be a smaller seminar-style class, but changing the name to Spartan Foundations gives us some flexibility, particularly in the implementation process, to perhaps do a larger course. But again, the goal would be to eventually have small sections of courses where, you know, first-year students would have, you know, opportunities to interact with faculty and student affairs professionals, as well as classmates. So the Spartan Foundations course would be a 3-credit course that would incorporate transition content, disciplinary content, and information literacy. The Spartan Foundations group was really lucky that back in the spring, Andrea convened a working group called the First Year Experience Working Group, and we relied very heavily on the final report that they issued on the importance of first year experience and transition courses at UNCG. They gathered a lot of data and looked at the literature about high impact practices, and it really informed the work that we did to come up with the Spartan Foundations course. We did look at existing courses, again, as Faculty Senate asked us to do, and we found that with existing course structures, this Spartan Foundations program could be implemented in a way that all first year students could take a course like this in their first 30 hours at UNCG. So again, that does exist. These courses, we have a lot of courses such as FYE 101 that we could work with to integrate all of this content into a 3-credit hour class. But in addition to those existing course structures, this is also an opportunity for departments or colleges or schools to develop their own courses that meet these requirements and could be considered Spartan Foundation courses. In order for this to be successful, because it does integrate the academic content that faculty are responsible for, and also the transition content, which tends to be more the work of our student affairs professionals, there is going to be collaboration required, and the subcommittee that worked on this really sees that as a strength of this program. It would allow us to do more collaboration between faculty and student affairs, and really allow everybody to bring their own expertise into this course, because research has shown that courses like this do assist students in being retained and graduating, and that really gets to what UNCG is trying to do with increasing graduation rates, persistence and retention and all those things. So we think that this course is going to help accomplish the goals of the larger university and allow our students to have this sort of experience very early on in their career at UNCG. All right, so now Aaron Terranova is going to come up and talk to us about health and wellness.
Afternoon, everybody. How we doing? Good? Should be excited. This is General Education Revision. So I'm here to talk about health and wellness, and I want to sort of bring some context of how we got here. This is one of the recommendations that we sent forward to the Senate. They came back to us, said we need a little bit more clarification. And so why health and wellness is sort of the big question. And we looked at this long and hard, and it really came down to, if you go to the Chancellor's website, I want to get this right, under his strategic plan, one of the core elements is health and wellness. So this is part of our strategic plan as a university, and we felt it would be really a huge disservice if the Chancellor and the university is saying health and wellness is a strategic plan of ours, and yet we are not giving that to our students. That's sort of where it came from. And then we talked to faculty, and most importantly, we talked to the students. And the one thing that the students kept coming back is, we want health and wellness, in particular mental health. So we take that into consideration. That's sort of where we came from and why we put this into her. So you can read the definition. This is adopted from a health and wellness textbook. We sort of modified the definition. When we first brought it to Senate, we talked about the 8 dimensions of wellness. That caused a little bit of confusion because people had not been exposed to spiritual, environmental, and occupational wellness. Kind of like, so we trimmed it down, and we said we're looking at physical or mental. Students really want the mental, and the physical just seems to be very common, and everyone kind of has a mental picture of what we mean when we say physical wellness, etc., physical health. So that's where we came from. If you look at the SLOs, we want knowledge in physical or mental health. Initially, we put that as an and we thought that would put a huge burden on faculty to try to do both physical and mental in one course justice. And we didn't want someone who's really knowledgeable, of course, really good in physical, to sort of be like, oh yeah, I know this mental thing, and vice versa. And we thought by doing or, it also maybe allowed more courses to come in and be, wow, we can do mental health really well. We've never thought of it before, we can do that. So that's one of the reasons why we switched the and to an or. And the second outcome would be analyzing that connection. So it's one thing to know about wellness and to know about physical and mental wellness, but can they make that connection to change behaviors, modify behaviors to affect their overall health? And that's what we're really looking at. Can these students take this knowledge here and beyond UNCG? And we all know health is a major issue facing not only the state of North Carolina, facing the entire country. Can we equip them with the techniques to better their health and make thoughtful, purposeful behaviors? Should I go into information literacy here too, or no? One thing we also did was include the information literacy competency in here. So that is also embedded in health and wellness, because when you think about how we make educated health and wellness decisions, it really is taking the best evidence, the best literature, the best research, and formulating that into a decision. And that we worked with the nursing department, HHS on that, and it really does tie so well into what we want our students to do. And when you think about it, a lot of our students probably getting a lot of news bits from Facebook, from their socials. We want them to take that information, analyze it from information literacy, say, yeah, you know what, that magnet thing really doesn't work. So that's where we're coming from. Again, making healthy decisions outside of our walls here. Good? Thank you.
No, wait, sorry. Hold on, Francis. Sorry, Francis. Where's Francis? Francis, you're, oh, right, Angela, sorry. We're getting there. Everybody take a 30-second mental break. Close your eyes, meditate. Shavasana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Frances Bottenberg in philosophy, and I had the pleasure of, yeah, that's a good idea. I had the pleasure of working with Angela Bolte in the Honors College, John Zarecki in classics, and Risa Applegarth in English over the summer as we were the critical thinking working group. And I just want to ask a quick question. How many of you think you teach critical thinking in your classes? Raise your hand. Yes, don't be shy. Because so most people, right? So in one way, our task was quite simple. We had a competency that most of you already feel very strongly, forms a part of your teaching. So there's a lot of good feeling towards this competency. But on the other hand, we had to figure out how to make it meaningful for a gen ed context, a multidisciplinary context. So what we ended up doing was trying to design student learning outcomes that were written in language that could be adopted and understood by faculty in many different disciplines. As Jody mentioned earlier, the idea is that this competency will be embedded in the 3 broad areas of knowledge that you see here on the slide. And this is really the only competency that has this function. So we really had to figure out how to make this work for many people. And also I will say that, of course we did our homework and we looked at expert literature and what other institutions do in terms of this competency. And what we really were able to distill is that fundamentally critical thinking, the ability that we're trying to get students to learn, is the ability to analyze and evaluate information, claims, arguments, even artifacts, so that they get a better understanding of them by accurately grasping their sense or meaning, and also looking at the evidence that goes into forming them. And of course, also we want our students to be able to create their own arguments. So you can see the 2 SLOs that we developed are at the bottom of this slide and are fairly straightforward, hopefully. And again, what will happen with this is that these two SLOs will be embedded into the critical thinking and inquiry courses, and also will be complemented by a third SLO that relates to the various areas of knowledge in each case. So that's what I would have to say about that. Thank you.
All right, now Chuck, sorry.
Hello, Chuck Bolton from History and the Dean's Office in the College of Arts and Sciences. Thanks. I and some other folks from the task force work with a fairly large group of people on the global area, and as Jody already said, the global could be addressed in a number of areas: humanities and fine arts, or social and behavioral sciences. In some ways, this group had a head start because of the global engagement quality enhancement plan that the university's been working on the last 5 years. And we also had the global markers, of course. So in some ways, what the task was to build on what was already there with the markers and the lessons that were learned from the QEP, and to try to expand that out a little bit. So the SLOs that are developed there were originally 4 in the QEP, so we have 3 here, which were designed to be, somewhat broader, but also more appropriate for general education. And as to the question of, would there be enough courses for this, we found that, already there were about 350 courses that carried the GL or GN marker, so there should be a number of courses that could fit into the global competency going forward.
So I did not work on the Equity and Diversity Task Force, but I'm here on behalf of those who did. And just like the global, the diversity and equity courses can be addressed by humanities and fine arts or by social and behavioral sciences. You can see here the learning outcomes. And this subcommittee identified over 100 courses that could potentially fit into this competency. So again, because of the current curriculum we have in place, this is another competency that could be easily addressed by our existing program, but also provides opportunities for courses in humanities and fine arts or in the social and behavioral sciences to develop these courses that fit into this competency.
And that group, you may know that there is an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusiveness subcommittee of the Faculty Senate that did a lot of work around the diversity and equity competency or learning outcomes. And then we do have a marker that's associated with courses that carry this sort of content, this sort of curriculum in them. So as well, this is learning that's already established within a lot of our courses here at UNC Greensboro. It makes a lot of sense to include in our general education program. So we are on the last slide, by the way. The implementation policies and procedures was letter E in the resolution from Faculty Senate of the 5 areas for recommendation to investigate deeper. The Faculty Senate pointed out this one. The concern was that the structure that was delivered with the competency and areas of knowledge framework was complicated and would complicate the implementation of that for students in terms of degree program, progress toward degree, those sorts of things. So we had a separate task force or a separate committee who worked specifically on identifying what the roadblocks might be and whether they would actually be roadblocks for us with the new framework and with the new set of competencies. And this is what they told us. Because of the structure that we've delivered, which is 11 separate courses that relate to only one competency, that attribute could be assigned to each course. There would be no markers, and therefore that complication in terms of student degrees was eliminated. The competencies would also be associated with entire courses, not with sections or instructors as we have right now. For those of you who teach writing intensive, speaking intensive courses, you may know that we could have a section of, or we could have a course, let's just say that it's Economics 201. We could have one instructor teaching Eco 201 who has been approved to teach it as a speaking intensive course. And therefore their section gets an SI marker associated with it, but we could have another faculty member that has not been approved to teach it as a speaking intensive course, and therefore that section does not have an SI. So we could have students at the end of a semester, half of whom are getting an SI marker for the very same class that the other half took, and those students didn't end up with a speaking intensive marker. We eliminated that with this new structure. So in this proposal, a course that's approved for a general education competency will have that be true for all of the sections taught for that course. We looked at the high-level transition plan that was developed, the need for resources, timelines, general education processes definitely is there. So there is still a lot of work that has to be done once this plan is actually approved. We've got to dig down into the details. We've got to figure out who's going to be doing approvals, how things are going to occur for faculty, for students, etc. But knowing that we will put together that list, the start of which you see right in front of you, and we will check off those boxes. We'll get through them. We're looking at an implementation date of fall of 2021, so we have a little bit of time to work through this. And then finally, something that the faculty on campus and the students on campus need to know, this is not going to be a quick transition from one general education program to the next. In looking at what happened when we moved from the Clare to the Aller program, these 12 years now, it was a 7-year transition. It took 7 years for the last students to enter the program to graduate, and therefore the university was maintaining degree plans that had both Aller and the old Clare at the same time. We have to be prepared for that. What that is probably going to mean in the end is substitutions of classes, because we don't expect you all to be proposing new general education marker and category courses at the same time that we're delivering the new competencies. So we're going to have to look at substitutions, and it's going to take a while for all of the students entering with the last catalog to leave. What we did not have with the last transition was the association of a catalog with the student's degree plan. When a student changes a major now, the catalog that is in effect at the time that they change their major will be the catalog and all of its contents associated with it that directs the student's progress toward degree. So when a student changes a major, if they change it to a new major in 2021, they will get the new general education program, and that will be the degree plan that they will fulfill toward their graduation. Again, there'll be substitutions. We'll have to work on student-specific degree plans on an individual basis, but that is a component that is going to be different from this implementation than from the last, that we just wanted to make you aware of. So as I promised, we are at the end of our presentation. We have a survey that is currently available. It was posted today. If you want to complete that survey in addition to providing feedback today, please do so. It is online on the Provost website for the general education revision. We have posted it. If you've been to that page, there is a section about a draft plan and surveys. The link is posted right there. Please ask your colleagues to go and provide feedback after reviewing the information and informing themselves about what is actually being proposed here. That survey will be available until September 13th. We'll take it down at the end of that day. We are working with Faculty Senate to get this on the agenda at the earliest, most logical time. We really hope to get a draft to them for the end of September for consideration at the start of October. So that's the timeline that we're looking for. That survey is available online. We also have a paper survey that we're going to hand out to all of you that we would really appreciate getting your reactions on. If you would fill that out, if you don't have a writing implement, we'll share. But if you would fill that out. So we are going to move on now. We'll start handing out those forms. But we want to now start working through some of your questions or comments. We have microphones at the front of the room that are connected to the speakers. It would be great if you would walk up to the microphone and use those so that all of our colleagues in the room can hear them. We will answer questions from the podium. We will bring our experts from the task force up here to help answer them. We want to get you as much information for your consideration of this plan as we possibly can before you leave the room today. So that is it. So, questions, comments. Hi. How are you? Good. Good.
I have a couple of questions. I'm director of undergrad studies, so they come from that direction. What levels can these courses be at? I'm sorry if that was mentioned when I missed it.
That's great, thank you.
Right now, as many know, we principally have 100 and 200 level courses at Gen Ed.
Yep.
But we actually also have 300 level courses.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Jennifer's asking about the level of courses.
And yes, that is my first question. I actually have another one.
Okay,
But I'll,
so the group that worked on the structure and the task force have had these conversations, and you need to understand that this general education program is about foundational learning. We strongly believe that 100 and 200 level courses is the right level of learning for these courses. We do understand that there are some 300 level courses that have been put together for freshmen and sophomores. We're not quite sure how that happened, since 300 level course numbers are supposed to be associated with junior level learning. And that's probably something that we're going to have to think about. But this program is intended for foundational freshman and sophomore level learning. While we think that we're going to go forward with a recommendation of 100, 200 level, we understand we might need to entertain 300 level courses. Jennifer.
I'm sorry, just to follow up on
Yep.
the issue of why there might be some at the 300 level. Right, can people hear me? I'm sorry. So to speak to the question of why. I realize at first glance it might seem odd for a course to be at the 300 level and be Gen Ed. Can you hear me? But it is to accommodate a very large percentage of students at the university who come in as transfers. And I have no idea how this new system might work in all of the articulation agreements. But as you know, unless a student has the associate's degree, and many of them don't have the associate's degree.
Right.
They've come from either a four-year university or they didn't finish the entire sequence for an associate's degree. They are still in the situation, in spite of being juniors, of having to fill those gen ed requirements. And that seriously hobbles their progress if they can't take something at the 300 level, since they are required to take a certain number of courses at the 300 level.
Right.
And we are all under pressure to get them to graduate within that four-year cycle. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's part of the whole conversation, is this 300 level course number is also part of the requirement that all students complete 36 credit hours at the 300 level or above. At the same time, the 300 level courses are an indication of a certain level of learning. So we've got to reconcile that. So this opens up a whole nother conversation. But just know right now, the plan is 100, 200 with an understanding that a rationale for why this is a freshman or sophomore level course would definitely be considered. This is the proposal, as I indicated with the implementation plan. There are a lot of details that have to be worked out. But that would definitely be considered.
Well, and with the Spartan Foundations class specifically, since the courses that we, targeted as potential for involvement in that, filling that requirement, would be FYE 101 and the freshman seminars classes would be some potential courses. And we would hope that for that requirement specifically, that any new courses that would be developed would be at the 100 or 200 level, just because those classes, we would like students to take them in their first 30 credits. So that's a little bit of a different thing, but just wanted to throw that in there.
Moses?
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful job. I'm really glad to see something like this because I've been on the Senate and I've seen different iterations of this Janet, issue. So thank you so much. Sorry, my name is Moses Akwa. I'm from the Management Department. My question goes to one of the competencies that you mentioned, and that is data analysis and interpretation. I really want to understand why it is only for, linked to natural sciences, because data analysis and interpretation does not only take place in the natural sciences. The other thing is also, that was also the only competency that we didn't see any SLOs.
Shall I speak to that?
Please, Ian.
So most of the competencies can be applied to almost any subject area, which leads to the design where we have any competency can be filled by any subject area. If you want students to see a certain number of each subject areas and a certain number of competencies, you end up with what we had last spring, which is this matrix design with two different kinds of things to count. So we decided, in order to simplify things and make it a single list for students to fulfill, we are going to attach certain competencies to certain subjects and locations and do that in a way that provided as much flexibility as possible, but still narrowed it down to one thing. And the data analysis, as a part of the quantitative reasoning, made a lot of sense in the context of the sciences. There was a place to put it, so to speak, in the plan. It did not, because the second science course, natural science course, was not carrying a global, multicultural, or diversity and equity piece. Also, the cry for more data analysis came strongly from the natural sciences on campus. That's where we were told by department heads that it really needed to be. All those made it seem like the optimal place to put it. That's not saying you can't teach data analysis anywhere else. It's saying that students have to get some data analysis in a natural science context. And as far as SLOs, we have some working drafts of those, but because that's a fairly late edition, we did not have time to convene a working group of content matter experts, and we didn't feel the task force had the competency to really put forward more than a rough outline of what those SLOs would look like.
Yeah, just a reminder, we're constrained by 34 credit hours. If we had the opportunity to add more areas of knowledge to the program, we would definitely take advantage of it. But because, as Ian indicated, we had this one class that did not, this one course, this one area of knowledge that did not have a competency associated with it, we took advantage of that. So to make the most of the 11 courses, that was where we put data analysis and interpretation, with the, the little caveat that we hope everyone's teaching data analysis and interpretation in this class, in their class. Not everyone, but a lot of people are, and that our students are getting it reinforced throughout their courses. Although they're not getting a general education competency associated with it, they are getting the learning across many courses. Jay and then Kelly.
Yeah, I do see data analysis as a big focus in the social sciences, so you see that as well. My question was not about that. I was following up on Jennifer's question. As you know, I'm with the BLS program, so we are focused on continuing, like transfer students who are coming in as juniors and seniors and with 140 credits and that sort of thing. So the Spartan Foundation is what has me concerned with this cadre of transfer students. If we're not going to be able to associate that with a 300 level course, is that going to, we'd have to figure out a workaround. Are we going to be taking one of our 300 level courses and redesignating it as a 200 level course? Or are we going to have to create an entire new foundational course for our program or something like that? That is a concern. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there. I know there aren't easy answers.
Well, and I'll tell you that the task or the subcommittee recommends that if a transfer student comes to UNCG having taken a transition course at another institution or some sort of similar, either at a community college or another 4-year institution, that they will have fulfilled this requirement, or that the requirement will be waived, obviously if they come in through the general articulation agreement. We did say, though, that the first year experience working group, again, found that this sort of course was beneficial for transfer students, and we would like to see the university offer an optional transition course for transfer students, maybe a 1 credit hour, or maybe even just a series of online modules that students could take, so that students could get, some of the more, if they already know how to do college, but how do you do UNCG, Sorry, that's not a great example, but yeah, so I think that trying to figure out more thoroughly how this will impact transfer students is something that we have definitely thought about and will continue to do so, so thank you.
Thank you.
So I was really happy when you were presenting all the competencies and various things. Then I got this form I have to fill out, and I thought I was going to say and again, it bothers me that Ian mentioned, well, you got to have 2 natural sciences, and we're masking the fact that we must have 2 humanities, and the only person that can teach information literacy is health and wellness. So these are either competencies or they're domains of knowledge. And I thought we were moving away. I mean, we're calling this something that it's not reflected here. Here? Thank you.
I have a microphone.
Yes, then Roberto gets to talk.
I'll pass it to the next
Roberto has a
person.
microphone.
You have to call on somebody.
Yes.
I didn't know who had the microphone.
So if I may real quickly, I'm Roberto Campo, I'm head of Department of Language, Literatures, and Cultures. Despite that charge, I'm trying to be objective about this. Amy, in your original characterization of, I guess, the process of going through this with the committee, you mentioned that the global piece, global and intercultural, was among the dangling competencies. For one thing, can we address that a little bit? Because these are so foundational, so fundamental to what it means to be a citizen in the 21st century world that we live in. How can we consider those dangling? That's a question I have.
Well, I can report that they're no longer dangling. They were dangling in the program, in the proposal from May, and that was actually one of the main concerns, was that, C6 and C7, for those of you who have been involved in this since the beginning, were courses that didn't have a specific home in the program. So by adding the requirements for, diversity and equity in the humanities, fine arts, or social and behavioral sciences, we've given them a home, so we're not, now we have the system with the markers and the categories and all that, and so we were trying to streamline that process, make sure that students can get the global and the diversity and equity competencies in that 34 hours, 33 to 34 hours, and now they have a home, and the home is either in the humanities, fine arts, or in the social and behavioral sciences.
Which raises additional questions. We have combined humanities and fine arts, and although I love the association, I don't see those necessarily as being one area. For example, and I'm sure you've run into this conceptual problem with the other ones as well, but here's a bottom line concern. We want to make sure that as much of our, I hope we agree that we want to have as much of our general education program infused with all of these competencies. I would submit that, in particular, the global part of it and the diversity equity parts of it, both of those are critical throughout, or ought to be given privilege throughout those. We are stuck with a 33 to 34 hour limit. It seems to me that, and you all have maybe thought through this so much better than I have, but again, the marker system that we have in the current structure allows us to double mark things, triple mark things in certain ways, depending on what they are. And would not that afford an opportunity to infuse better and have this this multiple marking and get that all done in 33, 34 hours? What are you trying to streamline here in some way to make this somehow more efficient, better, and having students get through it?
So Roberto, if we had a double marker system where our students still only take 34 credit hours, but they get double marked in a course in both, so global would be included, global and
Writing.
writing would be included. All that does is alter the student's transcript. It does not alter the student's learning, right? So the written communication course, whether it carries a competency of global or not, can integrate global learning. It's just a notation on the transcript that is changing. We are not discouraging the written communication course from teaching global. We are encouraging you to do that. Please do that.
Again,
it's just not going to be on the transcript.
Again, the written, the oral, the various the first 5 competencies that you listed there are more in the skills area, right? Whereas these other features that we're talking about here, the unfortunate dangling ones here, are really the content pieces of so much of this, right? So I don't see what we're missing in the conceptualization of this gen ed program going forward and thinking about SAC COC and how they're going to look at whether or not our students are actually accomplishing this. If we have a global marked course, like in the current system, that's likewise marked with a writing intensive or a speaking intensive or literacy of financial literacy or something else that we've considered to be priorities here. So I'm missing that piece here. Why can't we have 2 things in one?
So let's remember why we're here at all. There was dissatisfaction with the existing system, and one of the primary points of dissatisfaction was the markers. What we heard was that having a combination of areas or categories and markers as a kind of 2-layered system was complicating students, complicating advising, and it was very difficult to ensure that we had the right combinations of categories and markers available on appropriate days and time slots for students to get what they needed to graduate. The combinatorics was what was killing us. Heard that very clearly from the provost's office, that it was increasing time to degree for students. So our charge was pretty clearly to simplify down to a single-layer system. In the spring, we didn't. We had a 2-layer system, and that was one of the strongest points of pushback. We were told clearly too complicated. So we started listing the things, call them what you want, skills, competencies, the things that people wanted. Oral communication, written communication, quantitative reasoning, information literacy, critical thinking, be able to understand and use natural sciences ideas, social behavioral sciences ideas, humanities and fine arts ideas, health and wellness, some kind of freshman or foundational seminar. You get to 12 pretty quickly, and that's assuming you take 1 course from each of the 3 areas. We can't do that in 34 credits. So we started to say, how do we combine things? And what we realized was some things need a course of their own. A foundational writing course needs to be intensively focused on writing. It can have a context, it can have a setting, but the primary goal of the course has to be writing. Other things like critical thinking really very naturally fit on top of other things. Information literacy is like that. So we started looking at how can we take our long list, it's too long, and start to take some of the competencies and put them in other places. Yes, they're not all competencies. Our list is a mix of things that are skills like writing and things phrased as critical thinking and inquiry in the natural sciences, for example. Is that a competency? I don't care what you call it. We have this list of 11 different things that students need to take that together will expose them to the competencies and skills that are important and the disciplinary areas that we believe they should be exposed to in an active way.
So let's take it to the next step, which is conceptually for this general education program, it is meant to lay the foundation for these competencies, but another component to it is the urging of the major programs to integrate these competencies into their own programs. So what we will also be asking the programs to do is to identify the competencies that are strengthened, that are reinforced in the program, and global is a perfect element to enforce in any and every program across campus. So the general education credits are just the beginning of the students learning in all of these competencies. The next venture is to identify and integrate all of these competencies, every one of which is important for a UNC Greensboro student to graduate with into the major program. Okay? So again, general education is just the foundation, the building blocks for what has to be reinforcement, additional teaching in all of these competencies. Okay? Gary.
Yeah, so Jody, to go back to the 300 level issue, you had asked,
Yes.
like, how did this happen? Well, about 20 years ago, there was an express directive from the, at that time, Dean of Undergraduate Education, this was under Provost Hugh Pritchard, to renumber 200 level courses as 300 level courses, apparently for the very reasons that have been mentioned, that there's a 300 level graduation requirement and transfers are just slowed down too much from graduating because they don't have enough 300 level courses.
That's great.
And I don't think any of that has really changed.
Yeah.
So a lot of the reason that we have 300 level philosophy courses in our case, and I assume this is also true for other departments that are in Gen Ed, is because of that.
So maybe
So
what we-
a major thing that you can look at as a criterion is the lack of prerequisites.
Yes.
Especially for these
Yep.
courses, and they don't have prerequisites generally because they were originally 200 level courses.
Yeah, and that will absolutely be on the list of criteria for consideration. So maybe all we need to do is to adjust our catalog text to express that the definition of a 300 level course is not essentially junior level learning, that it can reflect some other level of learning. So thank you, that's very helpful, and that gives us a step in action that we can take. You saw it happen, you witnessed. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alan.
First, I want to commend everybody for doing a great job over the summer. But one of the pushbacks from the Senate was also having some of these general ed courses throughout the university and out of the college and being able to be delivered in other parts of the university. And what I see is that the critical thinking is all over the campus, but it's only in humanities and fine arts, social and behavioral sciences, and natural sciences. And I think if you really want to cover the problem with, especially, Sam Miller's probably not here, so I'm speaking for him, with the education people being closed off and not being able to get their advanced credits, they need that in their own area. I think you need to open it up a little bit and be more flexible. Other than that, I'm very happy with this.
Well, and I think, again, that the Spartan Foundation class is a great place for any school or department, school, college on campus to come in and offer students a course very early on in their degree.
But you're not hearing me. That's turf war. You've done is you've put it in social and behavioral and science, and you really can just say critical thinking and let you look at those courses that may be developed by the other areas and see if it satisfies it. That's
So
it.
we're required to identify humanities and fine arts, social, behavioral, and natural science courses in our program. And I think that we've done that nicely. And this is what's really important to understand, is that the terms humanity and fine arts do not define specific disciplines, right? There are traditional humanities and fine arts disciplines that we think about. But we associated the global and we associated the diversity and equity with humanities and social and behavioral. So what you're going to find is in the School of Education, whether it's library and information sciences, whether it's teacher education, whether it's special education, what you find in HHS, what you find in nursing, is that there are courses that very clearly teach global learning, very clearly teach diversity and equity, very clearly teach critical thinking. So there is the opportunity there for students to investigate within those disciplines that are spread across the entire UNC Greensboro campus all of these competencies. So there really is just a huge number of courses that could find themselves in general education teaching each of these competencies. There's opportunity for everyone across campus to get involved in these, and we'd encourage them to do so. If you looked at the explanation of the organization and structure of this program online, we take pains to explain that this is not something specific to the College of Arts and Sciences as much as we love our College of Arts and Sciences colleagues. We're going to find these competencies in business. We're going to find these competencies in public health. We're going to find these competencies in library and information sciences. We're going to find these competencies across campus, and we encourage everyone to engage. We want breadth of learning for our students. We are not asking that they go to the College of Arts and Sciences for general education. That is not what this is about. This is about exploration. This is about breadth. But what that means is that we need faculty in all of those disciplines to investigate this, to look at these competencies and say, we do this. How can we make sure that we do this in a general education appropriate context? Is there a 100, 200, or 300 level without prerequisites that we could adjust in order to make ourselves available? But that also means that there are courses that would do this but don't have a lot of seat availability, that we would really encourage those folks not only to get the General Education Competency Association, but also to open up seats to students outside of your programs, right? So that we can get students into those HHS, School of Education, Bryan Business School, nursing classes that aren't students who would naturally find themselves in those buildings, in those courses, with those instructors. This is about everyone on campus opening it up and seeing more opportunity and making themselves available to these students so that they can benefit from these different ways of thinking, these different ways of teaching, these different ways of learning. But and that's exciting, Alan. I mean, it's great to hear that you all want to be in this. And we want everyone in. We do. Vidya.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Amy. Vidya Gargeya from the Bryan School of Business and Economics. My comment may be construed as something, a little bit of a comic comment, but I'm serious. Some people in this room know that I'm a Spartan in spirit, guided by the mind of Minerva. We have Spartan foundations. Where is Minerva? So I would suggest that that course or that competency be in the form of an equation. So it will also teach them quantitative reasoning. LL, and this is a puzzle for those of you who are inclined to solve this puzzle. LL is equal to SS, or rather, LL is equal to MM times SS. What is it?
Don't leave us hanging, Vidya.
Yeah, it's like Socrates. Anyway, LL is learning for life, is equal to, with the mind of Minerva, times the Spartan spirit. So if we are truly wanting our students to change, let's call that LL is equal to MM times SS, or LL is equal to SS times MM. That's my comment.
That'll set our students straight.
Yeah, and I offer this free of charge. No, not as for the whole 2,000 students, but if you want me to run a workshop so that facilitators can understand what I'm saying, incidentally, without the mic I can speak. I used to be in the time of Socrates. So I will do it.
Thank you. Jean.
Is my microphone on?
Yes.
Yes. Can we go back to the student learning outcomes for oral competencies? I think that's the one. Maybe it's the written competencies. I'm looking for the ones, yes, metacognitive awareness. I think a lot of the reason why students regarded the old program as complicated, and I think the reason that they'll regard the new program as just as complicated, is that a lot of these student learning outcomes are written in really long words. Can we write them in words of 1 or 2 syllables? I've been puzzling what metacognitive might mean. It's in the 3rd bullet point. I have no idea.
Yeah, Heather's right behind you. Could you hand the mic to her, please? Thank you.
And also, just for written communication and oral communication, can't we please just go back to speaking and writing? No?
To answer the question, metacognitive awareness, and I'm Heather Adams from Department of English. I worked on this competency with Risa Applegarth this summer, and Risa is the current head of the college writing program in the College of Arts and Sciences. So I think that there were 2 pieces to metacognitive awareness that we have detailed, and that would be in the information that's available online. The first is that part of written communication practice, best practice and theorized practice in English and rhetoric and communication is rewriting, and that was mentioned before. So writing is a social activity. We need to talk to people, have people look at our writing, respond to our writing, and we also need to revise our writing in order to make it better. So it's not a one-step process. The other piece of this is what could be sometimes called reflection, but this is stepping back and being able to articulate as a writer why you've made the choices that you've made and how to name what you're doing as a writer. So not to just write without knowing why something is effective, but to make choices and be able to name those choices and do that through processes of reflection, usually is how that works. So we can potentially think about...
Okay, if I were a freshman, I wouldn't know what that meant. So as a writer speaking to my audience, I would need to use a word like revision or rewriting to get that idea across rather than metacognitive.
It's more than that.
Okay, that's a good point, and I think that the larger explanation has those additional words, and we can work with Jody and Amy if there's a revision that is requested based on that. We were trying to keep the SLOs very short.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand we're presenting you drafts of the student learning outcomes, so this feedback is important to us.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for this. I think I've been around since.
Regina?
It is.
Okay.
I'm a fan of Gen Ed. I bought into this years ago. I've been here from CLR to ALR to GEC, so I know this is painful. But I'm excited that we are moving forward. So as an old program coordinator, the only question I have is back to transfer. If a student is transferring in and they took a humanities course or social behavioral science course, when they transfer it in, it will not say critical thinking in. So really, are you focused on the critical thinking, or are you still just focused on the area, which is humanities, fine arts? Yeah. And if that's the case, I think it's, being health and wellness, which all of you need to check right now that you like. All right. Okay, but being in health and wellness, I think it could be difficult to transfer in a course that also has this information literacy on top of it.
Yeah. And we understand that, and to a certain extent, it's a fact that we cannot change the articulation agreement with our community colleges, but here's what they told us. We met with a whole group of community college faculty and administrators when we were planning this last fall. I mean, keep in mind, we've been doing this for more than 2 years, right? So we had conversations with the community college group, and this is what they said. Tell us what you're going to do, and we can adjust. So we will say to them, critical thinking is cornerstone to what we're doing in our general education program. And they will work with us. And they may just work with us to say, this is what critical thinking looks like at our institution and in our general education program, but we will move those pieces closer to each other. Okay. Jennifer.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay, I just want to follow up on that and then ask my clarification question because I'm still just a little confused about something you said earlier. But so not all of our transfers are transferring via articulation agreements or from the community college. And I'm very concerned that my students who previously would have at least completed some of their gen ed requirements are now coming in with 11 more courses that they have to take, including a Spartan Foundations course, which frankly to some of my students is going to be insulting. Like, they are going to find it really problematic that somebody thinks they need a transitions course at the stage of life that they're in now. So how do we account for that? How can transfers how can you look at a transcript and see, okay, they've got this humanities course, is there critical thinking in it? Maybe, we've got a syllabus and who's going to look at that for every single course for the transfer equivalency?
Yeah. So at this point in time, what we're going to be looking at is course equivalencies, right? Just as the articulation agreement says, these courses align with humanities, these courses align with natural sciences, and that's essentially carved in stone. We're not going to change that. So those equivalencies are still going to exist. As I mentioned, we'll be working with the community colleges so that they can understand what we're looking for in our general education programs. And of course, these are competencies. What calling them competencies affords us, although regardless of, we could call them roses and it would still afford us this opportunity, but we can start looking at student learning when they arrive. Okay. So with the rubrics that have been defined, we know what we're looking for in terms of student learning. Could we at some point determine that we want to understand our transfer student learning in terms of the critical thinking competencies and ask them to submit work from their previous institution that might demonstrate this learning so that we can understand how our transfers are coming in? Yes, that's phase 2 or 3 or 17. But there's an opportunity there for us to collect that information. And what we've done with defining student learning outcomes and defining the rubric for evaluation moves us toward that ability to collect that information. For right now, all we're going to be able to do are course equivalencies.
And then you said that the humanities and fine arts was not defined within the college. So I just want clarity that we could put forward a course and say it was, like we have our global and intercultural awareness course. Say we changed that, and it doesn't have prereqs, so it's 300 level, but no prereqs.
Yeah.
So if we posit that as a humanities course in that we are reading texts from around the globe and they are writing and interpreting those texts in terms of cultural identity, that would be considered for that? Okay.
There will be a process in place. It will not be based on course prefix.
Okay.
But it will be based on a rationale that explains how a course fits into the competency as it's defined. We did not go in this placing departments and placing disciplines within categories. That was not part of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi. I'm Sunny Spillane from the School of Art and specifically in art education. And I have 2 questions. One was, could we pull up the critical thinking competency so we can look at that? Because I'm thinking about, my question is related to critical thinking in fine arts.
No, it's way down here. Sorry.
Whoa, there it is. So in looking at the student learning outcomes and thinking about how courses in the School of Art and more broadly in the College of Visual and Performing Arts might address this competency. So in the SLOs, I see, okay, one is critically analyzing claims, arguments, artifacts, or information. So that could take place in an arts history class or in an arts practice course where you're looking at and analyzing work in a critique or in an art history, blah, blah. In the second SLO, construct coherent evidence-based written or spoken arguments. For a fine arts course, I think that needs to be expanded because to encompass like creative practice. Because in the fine arts, inquiry in our disciplines is not just written and spoken, it's through the creative medium of our discipline. And so those are ways in which arguments, evidence-based arguments are constructed in the fine arts. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So, arts people around here?
We had a long conversation about this in our task force.
I have one more question.
Great question, Sunny, thanks.
Thank you.
One of the things we did in the working group was to actually look at courses that are currently GFA listed and to see what sort of classes are offered in the Gen Ed program through fine arts. And we found that they are pretty much all interpretation classes and sort of introduction that are more theory-based rather than practice-based. If that's incorrect, then of course you should let us know. But the current list that we were looking at suggested that a lot of the student work that would be produced could be done or is done through written or spoken presentations. So that would be part of the answer.
Yeah.
But of course, if the larger aim is to sort of broaden course offerings, such that fine arts would like to offer more practice-based classes for Gen Ed, then of course we need to continue this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I think your analysis may be correct currently, and I think many of us in the fine arts would like to see the possibility of including practice-based classes in that as well. My second question, and this is more brief, is, well, maybe it's not more brief, but I'm looking at the two natural sciences courses or competencies, and I'm curious about the distinction between critical thinking and data analysis, how those are distinct from one another. Also, because thinking from the perspective of my discipline in critical thinking in the fine arts, as just looking at those critical thinking, at the critical thinking competency, if we're critically analyzing a work of art, that's data analysis and interpretation. So I wondered, and there seemed to be a lot of question about the data analysis and interpretation in the natural sciences competency, and I wondered if that might be clarified to be specifically quantitative data analysis.
You don't want to grab her microphone? Sure.
So, yes. Next. That last part, yes. When we wrote data analysis, we were definitely thinking quantitative data analysis. In fact, data analysis was looked at as a continuation of the quantitative literacy competency begun in one of the foundational quantitative literacy course. Quantitative reasoning, sorry, the name shifted over time. So yes, it's in a certain sense what we're doing with the quantitative reasoning competency is putting part of it in that foundational course and continuing it in the natural science course that carries data analysis.
Okay.
As far as the distinction between that and critical thinking can be broader than that. It's hard to interpret data critically without doing critical thinking, but there's a broader space. In physics, for example, a very theoretically based course doing a lot of physics theory is not going to do data analysis precisely, but it's going to do a lot of critical examination of arguments based on theory. Does that?
Yeah,
address-
I guess I just wonder, could there, bleh, could you just change the name to quantitative data analysis in the natural sciences to make that clear? Is that possible?
Yes, I think the SLOs
Make
are
that
always
clear.
going to be the litmus test of what we mean by those things, but those kinds of wording questions, please bring them on, because at this point, our goal is to try and communicate as well as we can what our intention is for the program, so you can weigh in on the intention in the design. I think wordsmithing to make everything ironclad clear and then understandable by students is a frontier we haven't really done. We've tried, but we don't think we've mastered that part yet.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, again. I do want to pick up on this problem with the transfer students. Just, I'm worried about actually some people being turned off, because I get a lot of inquiries from students who want to transfer into UNCG and they want to know how things will count. And indeed, they're not part of this articulation agreement with the community colleges. And so obviously everything is complicated, but I think this is an area that I hope will be given particular attention, precisely because I can't make those decisions.
Yeah.
If it's a gen ed question, it must go to the committee must meet, and all of those things take a good bit of time, by which the student may have decided to go elsewhere because he or she has a definite answer about what will be needed. And so I just hope that can be sorted. The last thing to say is, and again, this might risk sounding humorous, but I really tire of seeing that Spartan helmet, and I think it's actually quite menacing looking, and I'm not so thrilled about calling that introductory course Spartan Foundations, even if it is preferable to the previous title, whether it be called Minervan Foundations or something else. But we are not a sports team here. We have a sports team, but I know that obviously for branding reasons, we're becoming Spartan over and over again. And I find it a very masculinist, militaristic, hostile image. And I would rather not be part of the general education vocabulary. And again, that may seem in jest, but I do actually mean the point earnestly.
Yes. Francis has a quick comment. Sorry.
I better say something. I'm sort of fully aware of the struggle of Minerva versus Sparta, Rome versus Greece. And the only reason why I thought this might be something to at least consider is because our students consider themselves Spartans. And I understand that that might be sort of begging the question. But we're trying to create language and a sort of picture of this program that our students will be able to embrace. And it seemed to us like going with that sort of a title might be a way to do that. At the same time, I understand your concerns.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
How about the first year experience with, spear of... Who's next?
Hi. So I'm Chris Cassidy. I'm the director of the School of Art, and I'm also on the General Education Council. And so I would just join in with the folks that have already said that I think this is a very elegant solution to what seems an insoluble problem at the beginning. And so just kudos to everybody that worked on it over the summer. I think I do think it accomplishes that goal of leaving there's choices for students to make here. I mean, besides just like there'll be a whole bunch of courses available and they choose from those, but there's literally, there are some paths through here they can choose to kind of emphasize certain areas of study over others while still being constrained in terms of the competencies, the skill-based competencies that we are asking them to do. And so I think that is really, I think, a fine balancing act that I think that the task force GERT to really pulled off. I think it's really quite good. I think there are some things, I mean, just in terms of the implementation in the future, and I think that I would highly recommend that and geez, it might just be the Gen Ed Council. I don't know who it is that's going to have to make these, but maybe Faculty Senate too, to like request resources ahead of time. I feel like there's going to need to be quantitative data analysis looking at historic student preferences in terms of where they're taking these courses. I'm somebody who does course scheduling.
Yeah. Yes.
And introducing a lot of student choice into that makes it hard to predict what I'm offering. And so having a little bit of data analysis on the background, looking at historically, even though it's going to be very incomplete, and ultimately you're just going to offer sections and students are going to be like, well, I'd like to take this path, but actually this is what's offered, so I'm taking it. So there's going to be a little bit of bottlenecking that's just going to make determinations. Anyway, so I think just like asking for that work to be done at the university level so that everybody who's going to wind up implementing this later has that to fall back on. And then the other thing I just wanted to clarify, I mean, I think you've made the point, but when I talk to students and we're looking at selecting courses through the schedule and they're looking for Gen Ed courses, I tell them, like, do not type anything in subject, just type in the category. And that's what you're saying in terms of these things, that like multiple different prefixes may satisfy, not every one of, there's not going to be any art courses satisfying the quantitative reasoning, but multiple prefixes may satisfy. They don't have to be in the college, in the behavioral sciences to do that, right? I mean, that's what I heard, so thank you.
Exactly. Other questions? Please do not leave here wishing you'd asked a question. Now's your opportunity. You've got a huge portion of the task force here. You've got many faculty who helped develop these definitions and these student learning outcomes. Please, if you have a question, ask it. Yeah.
One question about the language.
Do you want a microphone, Gary?
Gary.
Thank you, Larry.
I did have one question about the exact language used in the diversity equity thing. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's some kind of, I would say, a lack of perfect harmony between the title of that category and then the SLO for it. And the SLO talks about power structures and oppression and stuff. That doesn't seem to really mesh, except by many levels of inference and theory, with diversity and equity. Okay. I know they're related. It seems like, given the SLO, it seems like the category description should have been something else, like oppression and inequity or something like that.
Okay. Thank you for that. I am looking around the room for people who served in developing those student learning outcomes, if they wanted to speak to that at all. We can also just accept that feedback and present it to them. It looks like Connie would be willing to.
Connie.
Thank you, Connie.
Certainly, if you can say that inequity would be related to that, thank you. You could certainly say equity is part of
Well,
this.
it's certainly related, but I'm just saying it's not the most direct.
Well, you mentioned inequity as something not necessarily related, but that was a part of that.
Yeah.
When we look at systems of equity and inequity, it's difficult to have those kinds of discussions with students without having discussions of systems, power structures and systems. And so the group that formulated this found those to be critical to the idea, particularly of equity in terms of power relationships and structures and how those power relationships and structures function. The diversity element of it, I think, comes in with the fact that oftentimes a lack of diversity that's found in various contexts is often a consequence of how those power structures function. So I believe that's the context in which the student learning outcomes were being written.
And please know that the faculty expertise that was brought to work on this competency and these learning outcomes are folks who served on the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee that was part of the Faculty Senate development. So we made sure that those were the people helping us develop this. Yes.
Just, I'm going to say a few things that perhaps are too confusing or vague, but it comes to my mind that in the categories there's apples with oranges in terms of concepts. The second thing is, in this one, which I'm all for the left, perhaps myself, I'm from the left, I would say it this way, perhaps more, but I think this is, again, the question of ideology and the historization of frameworks, of ideological frameworks. And so, first of all, I would rather have a more, concrete title, so systems of oppression. The other one is the taking certain concepts as granted and universal when we don't historicize. An example of this would be even health and wellness. This is a very cultural and historical rooted concept that change across, we take it as it's a granted thing, obvious and evident, talking about data is right there. And so that's problematic to me. It's right there, wellness, what we consider wellness, what we consider health, even going to the gym, lift up some weights. And the other one is this one here, where for my perspective, about oppression, the way we see oppression, that's a whole debate for philosophy, sociology, political science, history, and there are multiplicity of approaches. So we're taking it for granted that we all here in this room are going to measure these kinds of things that, it's very, very controversial. I understand we're trying to bring to the university a space for contrasting what's going on in society, but we also have to understand that this is a very biased, very ideological concept that even though I might agree as a person from supposedly the left, this is something that I think it's very controversial, and I would not have something like that as a general concept. That's all.
Well, my question was just going to be, could you please remind us what the next steps are, and when is this coming to a vote or a blessing, or, okay, the timeline, yes.
Thank you. So yes, the Faculty Senate meets on September 11th. We'll open discussion with that group on that day, and we're going to kind of see how things go. I'm not really sure what happens beyond that. Our goal is to have a complete draft based on your feedback to Senate by the end of September, and also to the General Education Council, which Aaron is going to speak to.
Gen Ed Council actually has to go for Gen Ed Council.
Yes.
So we meet as a council this Friday, so we're going to take feedback, etc., and I'm bringing that to the council this Friday. That's really the next immediate step, is that hopefully a lot of council members here, I can't see everyone here, but we're going to kind of process that all as a Gen Ed Council, take the feedback, and then move it forward and hopefully get it to Senate by the deadline. But the actual next step is this Friday with Gen Ed Council.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you.
So get your survey responses in quickly.
Yes.
So that we can consider them.
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes, so Andrea just said that the plan is for the first vote to be at the October Senate meeting, so that's a goal.
All right.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for listening. Again, please continue to provide us feedback. And yes, please, thank you for being here and engaging with us. We really appreciate it.
In a spot you can put it right there in the middle.